Today we're talking with Kevin Jones. How are you, Kevin?
I'm fabulous. I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. Now, people may not realize this. You have a podcast called Teaching Restored, and it was like 15, 20 minutes ago. You just finished interviewing me, and still, little do they know, the tables are turned here.
That's
And
right.
now I get to fire
Maybe we should
questions
have done
your
that
way.
backwards so that I could torture you afterwards.
Oh, yeah, I see. I see. Well, and we'll link to that episode because I think this that one will release before this one, and so if people want to go listen to more of me, they can do that. But also just get familiar with your podcast. Maybe where did this idea of teaching restored come from?
So I love teaching overall. I love especially the gospel of Jesus Christ. I love teaching. My whole background is in training organizations. And so I've done it not only professionally, but also within the church a ton.
Mhm.
And I'm always trying to improve things, trying to make anything, whatever it is that I'm touching, just improve it. I have this, I'm a little bit too critical in that way of everything that I do. And I want to just improve everything when my wife sometimes
Can't
tells
stop
me,
tinkering, right?
that's right. Slow down. Everything doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, that's right. So I love teaching, and I want to help others be better teachers overall because I've seen where we can improve a lot. So that's where it really came from.
Yeah. And then does this tie into what you do professionally, or maybe do you do teaching or instructing professionally?
I do. I've been doing teaching. I used to do more consult after I got laid off too many times. I decided, you know what, I'm going to do on my own. So I did more consulting, and then the niche that I was in, I was doing more some speaking. And over the years, it's kind of flopped where I do more professional speaking and less consulting. And so that's I do a lot of speaking.
Nice. Awesome. Now, have you had a lot of callings just in your church experience where you've been teaching, or?
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah. And I've loved every bit of it.
That's cool. Now you're in the is it safe to say Seattle area, or how would you frame it?
Yeah, it's actually I'm just outside of Vancouver, which is just barely north of Portland. So really we're a suburb of Portland.
Gotcha. And you've had some teaching callings, you've been elders quorum president, you're in a bishopric right now. But I mean, that's the thing with teaching. It's so easy to talk about teaching in the context of leadership because a lot of what leaders do is teach. And so regardless of where you served, you're always probably using a lot of these tools and tactics that you talk about. Yeah. And then, so if people subscribe to Teaching Restored, what do they generally, I mean, I know I came on and talked about some teaching principles from my perspective. Is that generally what you do, or on there?
Yeah, overall, really, we recognize that teaching is not only, a teacher. I'm a Sunday school teacher, or I teach the youth, or primary, right? But there's also teaching the gospel as a missionary, or some of the off ones like seminary isn't traditionally thought of, but also as a parent, or just teaching your friend about the gospel. So we talk about all these different types of teachings, or how to teach. So there's, Come Follow Me and a whole bunch of other podcasts where they say what to teach. And Julie and I were focused on, well, how do you teach that? What kind of things should you be thinking of? What kind of, and it isn't always, here's a tactic you can use, put everyone in a circle, or we do talk about things like that, but also different ways to help everyone become just more used to learning is another one, right? Because we want to help people learn. If we're going to teach, there's no point in teaching if they're not going to learn. So also, how do you help them learn at the same time? It's a subtle difference, but it's actually a big difference.
Yeah, I think that's worth sort of sitting with there, because it's one thing to teach, and sometimes we see teaching as almost this lecture style, and we know we're supposed to avoid it. But I'm teaching, so I've got my 5 points, and we'll go through them over the next 45 minutes. But to approach it more of like, no, we want them to learn how to absorb the information, how to learn, rather than just, fire hosing them with information and hoping something sticks.
Right. Yeah. How many times have we had our kids at the dinner table on Sundays, and what did you learn today? Oh, I don't know. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, obviously you were taught something. Don't you remember anything? And a lot of times they do learn something great. And we love those times when they take away and they just come back and go, oh, that was incredible. And it changes them. And that's the kind of stuff that we want to help people create, are those changing moments when they teach.
Yeah, that's powerful. Now, so we're going to go through some general sort of teaching principles to maybe help other teachers out there, and these will probably be applicable to whether you're teaching the youth or you're teaching Sunday school, adult Sunday school. And is that safe to say?
Yeah. Oh,
Cool.
absolutely.
Awesome. Now you've had this emphasis, and even from the first time we met, you've talked about this emphasis on questions and the power of questions. Where would you introduce us to that concept of questions in terms of teaching with questions?
So I think that a lot of times we focus, when we ask questions, we almost abuse them, because we'll ask a question and it's off the top of our head. We don't think about the questions. We're very focused on the content. And so we have all these quotes, we have all these scriptures we're going to read, and that's great. But the questions that help us dive into them aren't really used or aren't really prepared very well. And so we have these off the cuff questions. And I've noticed that when we purposefully ask really, really good questions, then everything changes. Or everything can change, right? Not that necessarily that the questions are end all be all by any means, but questions can make it so it takes a class who may be just sitting there nodding, trying not to look at their cell phones, to try to be engaged, to someone who is leaning forward and saying, wow, okay, where are we going with this? How does this work?
Yeah. And so, and that's the interesting thing, because sometimes I'll be sitting in the class and the teacher will state a question, right? Or ask a question. And I'll think, oof, like, not a good question. Like, just because it doesn't give me much to work with. Or am I just trying to read your mind? Or like, why are you asking this question? Or, right? So, I mean, how did we, when we're preparing and we want to be very intentional about questions, like, is there a formula we can follow? Or how do we know if we have a good question or not?
Okay. So I've come up with a kind of a, it isn't a really linear type of thing, but it parses out questions in different categories. And I just want to kind of go over that a little bit, because actually, let me ask you,
Okay.
When we think of questions, what are the two kinds of questions you've heard about?
Maybe like a yes or no question, or a question that's maybe more open-ended question.
Okay. Yeah. So we always hear about the open-ended questions and the closed-ended questions, right?
Yeah.
But if you take a question like, and we've all heard, you should ask open-ended questions,
right?
Because they're so much better than closed, right? We all hear that. And is that really true? I don't think it is. I don't really, I really don't. So, and even then, when you ask an open-ended question, if you're to ask a question like, who is Lehi's father? Well, that's not a yes or no question. It's an open-ended question. Compared to, when you did this and you feel the Spirit, how has that changed your life? Those are two completely different questions. Yeah. But they're still open-ended.
Yeah.
So they're not all open-ended questions aren't the same.
And so don't be afraid of the close-ended questions, or whatever we call them.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So let me kind of just real quickly walk you through these different types of questions. The first one is more closely linked to the closed-ended, and that's called the binary. Okay. Binary meaning one or the other. Typically it is, you can think of it as a yes or no question, but you can also think of it as hot or cold, up or down, heaven or hell kind of things, where it's one or the other. Now, a lot of people might think that these kind of questions are really not powerful, but I'll give you a quick example. My wife and I went on a tour to Germany with a tour group that Hank Smith led. Oh, and this was a couple of years ago, and met so many great people. It was a fabulous time. And while we were there, he would start the day off in the tour bus, and he would do a little devotional. And one time he was talking about how his friends or someone he was talking to would every now and then say something along the lines of, well, the flood. I don't know that the flood could actually happen. Maybe it's a
Yeah.
local thing and not a global thing. Or Jonah and the whale, seriously, in the belly. I don't think that could actually be possible.
Uh-huh.
And so, and he answered back with something along the lines of, what about the resurrection? Do you believe in the resurrection, where he died and came back to life, and that we all can do that? Well, yeah, of course. Well, if he can do the most important thing, do you think he can do those things that you might think are not possible as well? Yeah. I guess so, right? So
Yeah.
that's a yes or no question that could be really powerful.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's really the context you've set it up in, right? That you're sort of guiding them to this question more thoughtfully.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there are really a couple ways to use binary. Well, more than a couple, but a couple that I'll mention. One is more of a guide.
Uh-huh.
If you think about a lawyer interrogating someone on the stand, they lead them often through a series of binary questions to get to a certain point. Now, you can do the same thing in a class. Do you believe this? Well, then do you believe this? Well, then what do you think about this? Then and lead them, and then they get to this final point of, oh, all right, if A equals B, then and B equals C, then A must equal C, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you can lead them through that.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's this framing of it, right? Again, that context of, because in order to teach in a certain topic, you have to invite them into that context or that framing, or else, if they don't have the foundation of that framing, or if they disagree with the foundation of that framing, then those questions won't be helpful, or they're not going to learn anything, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That's cool.
And you can also use it in an anchor way. So we'll get into these other types of questions, but you can do these deeper questions and then end it with a binary question of, okay, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about this? And someone kind of bears their testimony. And then you say, so then what about this? Do you believe this? Then the answer is, well, yes. And it kind of finishes almost like a missionary lesson. We teach all these things. We teach all these principles, feel the Spirit. And then, will you be baptized? And yes, it kind of anchors the whole discussion in that one. So these closed-ended or binary questions can be really powerful.
Yeah. That almost like we've arrived somewhere, right? We're all here. Yes, we are all here. And right, what's next, right?
Right.
So that's cool. What else about as far as the importance of questions that or is there any more of this? This rubric.
Yeah. So there's next comes factual questions, and factual just means that there is an answer. Okay. There is a correct answer, I'll say, and it's for example, you may ask, well, let me look at these. What year did Joseph Smith have the first vision?
1820.
Right. There we go. We know the answer, right? And these are the kind of questions that you almost don't want to hear in a classroom, because you don't want to answer them because they're so basic.
Yeah. Or you'll hear the person behind you sort of whisper it. If you hear that, right? It's like, this is so easy. I'm not even going to raise my hand to answer this, right?
Right. Yep. Don't want to, but you do. What is the law of tithing? The law of tithing. I can say what has been written about it and what the Lord says, and that's it. Right.
Yeah. Factual. Uh-huh.
Right. But they can be very, very powerful. So, okay, this is such a great example. I love this. And I don't know whether this is true or not, but we're just going to go with it. I heard that our stake president uses this question. Again, whether he does or not, I haven't asked him. But if you think of a stake president interviewing a potential missionary, prospective missionary, they could ask, have you viewed pornography? That is a binary question, yes or no. Okay. No, you haven't? Good. Let's move on. But you could also ask, the stake president could also ask, when was the last time you viewed pornography? Because it is so pervasive that it's hard not to ever, for pretty much anyone, not to. And then you can have a discussion around, well, what is that exactly? Yeah. And what happens if accidentally, or what are you, or is it happening and you're choosing that? but
Yeah.
it sets it up for a discussion in that perspective, right?
Yeah. And it really removes the shame of it, right?
Yeah.
Let's assume, I mean, 2024, come on. Like you've
Yes.
stumbled across something, whether it's you stumbled across
Yes.
something or you've had a habit with it. Let's just talk about it. So when was the last, or what, when was the last time you saw pornography? And let's have a discussion, right? If you asked me that in 1991, if I was an adult back then, I'd sort of be offended. Like, wait a minute. Who says I've seen pornography?
You assume too much.
That's right. Yep. Awesome.
Yeah. So factuals are pretty much yes or no. Now, at the same time, I could ask you, who is your scripture hero?
Mhm.
That answer is going to be different for you than for me. And so that it's still a factual question. Now, the explanatory question is what it kind of sounds like, where you have to ask a question, or where you ask a question, you have to give an explanation for whatever it is. Like, why do you think Peter denied Jesus 3 times? Okay, well, I'm going to dive into it. And it's still at the head level, though. You're still giving what you know, or what you've heard, or what you think, or your opinion. It's getting a little bit deeper and helping someone dive into more really thought-provoking questions and answers. But it's a far cry than just a factual,
Yeah.
In what book do we learn about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So we've talked about binary questions, factual questions. Was there another one in there?
Factual. Then this is the explanatory.
Okay.
And the binary and the factual questions, when we teach, they're easy to ask. And so we just do that. Explanatory gets a little bit more difficult. You almost have to plan those out sometimes. And so they're a little bit more impactful, but I would say that the most impactful are called introspective questions. And the introspective questions make us answer from our heart. They make us really dive into how we feel about way past our head, and really almost, and a lot of times it will actually happen so that when you answer an introspective question, we're almost bearing our testimony.
Yeah.
We're to that level of, how do you feel about this? How do you feel? What do you think about God's love for you? Then we can answer those kind of questions. And it deepens not only when we answer it, we bear our testimony, but it also deepens our conviction of that, because we are the ones who are saying it. It's not the teacher telling us, we're the ones who all of a sudden are saying this, and it's coming out of our mouths. And so it solidifies even more our testimony in that way.
Yeah. And this is one thing, actually, this is a perspective that Hank Smith taught me in when I interviewed him, is that he talked about building the silence into your question. Because sometimes we ask this introspective question and it's like, we'll ask it, we'll pause maybe 5 seconds, and it's like, oh, nobody wants to answer. Like, move in. No, like you asked, like, I got to sit with that for a minute, like give me a second to process and then I'll give you an answer. But so, I mean, you almost have to realize you have to build that silence in as you're asking more introspective questions. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. You do have to be okay with the silence. And if you're not uncomfortable at some point, maybe we're not getting deep enough.
Yeah. Or even just tell them, like, hey, let's take 1 minute, everybody, or 2 minutes. And here's this question. Why don't you just sit with it? Right. So
one way to really use this kind of question is when someone you ask a factual or an explanatory question, they do that. Then you dive in with the introspective question and you do a follow-up question to that. And it's a great, especially for youth who will just often give the Sunday school answers, and they'll just, I don't want to go any deeper, but this kind of makes them go deeper if they're going to answer the question.
Yeah.
And then that's where you kind of have to give the space as well, like you were saying, the silence, because they may start thinking about things that they have never considered before.
Yeah. Anything else around the explanatory question? You talk introspective. Is there other components to that, or?
With the introspective, you and I have talked about kind of creating a space, a safe space, right? You have to create that space where they want to answer and are okay to answer that. If you don't have that, then no one's going to answer the introspective questions. You may ask an introspective question, but they'll answer it in an explanatory way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important to create that space. And then the last kind of question is the transformative, where, and these are more question unicorns, where you don't plan them, but they just happened. Let me ask you, have you ever had a question that you've been asked that has completely changed your outlook on something and your life, maybe even?
I'm sure I have. I'm trying to think of an example, but one of those questions that it like it hits you, right? You must think like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Wow, you've guided me down this path, and then you throw that at me. Like I can't just reply. I just can't respond that quickly. I got to sit with it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. These kind of questions make a huge impact, but you can't really plan them, because one person it'll hit, another person it's not going to hit, and they'll just go, "Oh, that's really nice," and move on. So it's more of on the learner side, whether it's transformative or not. And that's where we'd love to get to. We'd love to get to the place where when we teach, whether it's our kids or a class, where we're asking these introspective questions and they're having an experience. They're really understanding, wow, okay, that's how I feel. Oh, I've never thought of that before. I need to go wrestle with that even. And part of the problem of asking introspective questions as we walk down this path here is that the teacher lets go of control of the class. And suddenly this becomes more of a shared experience rather than I am guiding it, and this is what you need to learn. And here you go. Here's my content for today.
Yeah. No, I love this component, especially in the context of teaching, is that it will like thrust people into their own study, right? And what a great place to end, a classroom or inspire is a question so powerful that on the drive home, they can't get it out of their mind, right? But they lay down at bed and like, or the next time they're opening their scriptures, like, okay, I gotta dig in more here, right? And that's a perfect scenario.
Yeah. And that's what I hope. Every time I teach, I hope to leave with something like that, some kind of question where they need to go, the learning continues on beyond what we just discussed. Because if we as teachers say, here's the content, there you go, they can walk away and go, great, I learned that, and then stop, and then it has an end.
Yeah.
What if we were able to extend that by asking great questions? Like you said, you're driving home or you're in bed at night thinking, wow, I really need to figure that out.
Yeah.
But that's hard because you're going to be asking questions that may be a little bit, I'm going to use the word controversial, but not in the contemporary text that we think of that, right? Context. It's more of a controversial in my mind of what that may be personally to me in the way I feel and the logic that I have going around in my brain.
Yeah. And sometimes we're like, I pretty much got First Nephi figured out. I mean, I've been through this several times. I've heard the lessons, but for them to be taken on this journey where they can't, they're like, wow, like I want to jump back in. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. These are the 5 question like components or the type of questions, I guess, that a teacher can have in mind. So I'm curious, like a Sunday school teacher is sitting down, they've sort of bathed in the scriptures of, the reading lesson and they have maybe a series of questions come to mind, like how where does the rubber hit the road with this as far as like, how do I organize this? Is it more of maybe a skill set? I just sort of get the feels. I'm asking questions. I jump to a binary to then down to a, explanatory question, or how can what's the structure of this that a teacher can use when they're teaching a lesson?
Good. So typically you start with the binary, you go to the factual, you go to the explanatory, and into the introspective. And that's kind of a basic model that just getting used to it, you can start using. But when you start really diving into it, you start to realize, no, I can jump back and forth between all of them depending on, okay, do they need to learn more about this topic? Okay, I need to jump back a level. And really, I hate to call them levels because they're really not levels in and of themselves, right? They're just different types. And so but you can start to jump back and forth between them. Now, there's no one way to do it. I mean, there are several ways that you can combine them to do different things using different tactics, but that's that's kind of on a, after you've really dove into questions and really are using questions really, really effectively, then you start to learn some of those strategies. But I would say, as kind of a teacher, I would even highly recommend that you build out your content, write out your questions. And what I typically do is I almost always just get rid of the content and I've got my questions. And in the end, the notes that I take with me are maybe a few scriptures and then just questions, and let it go from there and see where it goes, and let go of control, which is kind of maybe really scary for some people.
Yeah, for sure. And again, it's important to read the content of the verses, right? But not so that you can teach it per se, as more as you can recall it, right? And like, oh, that what you just said there reminds me of something that happened in, Second Nephi, whatever. And then you go there, right? Rather than, okay, everybody has to leave with because this is a temptation that you want everybody to leave with clarity of whatever the lesson plan was. But like you said, to have them leave with some questions is even better,
Right. Yeah, if you can read a verse, it's one thing to read a verse and say, this is what we learned. It's another thing to read a verse and say, what did you learn from that? What can you share about that? What have you learned that someone else in the room hasn't learned? And do it that way.
Yeah. Anything else we haven't covered as far as the 5 types of questions, or did we do pretty good there?
Yeah, well, I'll also mention this. It's not only great for teaching, but it's great for leadership as well. Asking the right kind of questions. For example, when you have someone who, let's say you're in a leadership position and you want to fill a calling. Someone moved. Okay, great. Now we have an opening in young women's and we need to fill them. What, according to what you've seen and what you've heard, what is the typical question someone might ask next?
Like when filling the calling?
Yeah.
Well, who doesn't have a calling?
Yeah. Right. Who doesn't have a calling? Who could we put in here? Who might be good?
Yeah.
What if we change the question something along the lines of, whose life will really be blessed and come closer to Jesus Christ by fulfilling this responsibility? That is a completely different question. And just by asking different questions, we can change the way we lead as well.
Yeah. Stimulates revelation, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Are you familiar with Liz Wiseman? Do you know who that is?
No.
She's a guest on. She's been a guest a couple times on Leading Saints. She's a leadership author who happens to be LDS. She wrote a book called Multipliers, and she talks about this dynamic of asking questions. She even talked. We'll have to link to it, but she gave a talk at BYU where she talks about this concept of simply asking questions. So, and she does it in the context of putting your kids to bed at night. And instead of, barking the demands like I typically do, like brush your teeth, get your pajamas on, right? Like put your toys away. She said she challenged herself, or I think a colleague challenged her, that to simply ask questions the whole time. What do we typically do this time of night? Well, we go to bed, right? What do we do first when we go, and then they sort of are guided down this. And so I've often proposed, put it out there for like leaders. If you're the bishop, like I challenge you to try and facilitate a ward council meeting where the only rule is you can only ask questions, right? And it's amazing the safety that creates. It opens up everybody's mind. Revelation flows. People feel like you're inviting them in to participate rather than just saying, I'm calling the shots here. Here we go. So it's a powerful concept in this context.
It is not only in teaching but also in leadership. You're right. If you can just ask questions, and I would highly recommend that everyone try that. It's not easy to do because we want to give direction. We want to give content. We want to say, this is the way it's going to go, but to step back and just ask questions. And then you'll find out, oh my goodness, was that even a good question? That was a pretty poor question. And then start to realize I need to upgrade my questions a little bit. I need to spend some time and really think about what I'm asking and who I'm asking of, that can completely change the way we not only teach, but we also lead.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really, really helpful. Any other thought, principle, tactic we need to make sure we cover before we wrap up, or how do we do?
I would just suggest that as people are leading, as people are teaching, that you focus on the question. And one exercise I do is I will write down a question that I think will be good, and then I reiterate it maybe 20 times and say, that's a question, that is a question, but can I ask a better question? And then do it again and again. And then when you get to around 10, it starts to get harder, but that's where the really good questions come in, and you realize, oh yes, we can do this a lot better than just what's off the top of our heads.
Yeah.
Go through those questions, and the revelation of what you can ask, it becomes incredible. It becomes more of a discussion, becomes deeper all of a sudden when we ask those questions.
That's really helpful. Just that sort of that brainstorming process of, letting it unfold and process when it just comes to the questions. Because questions, I think conceptually, it's such a basic thing. Like a question's a question. And yeah, Kevin's done a good job with showing different types of questions, but I mean, question's a question, but then sometimes you can just change one word and it's like, oh, like that makes me intrigued just a little bit more, and it's almost, the questions can almost become magic where you put out a question and people can't help but gnaw on it for those 40-50 minutes of the class, then it goes and leads to more questions and discussion, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'll give you another example of that. You said just change one word. How about just change the tone, for example?
Oh yeah.
My wife went to go drop off something to a friend's house years ago, and the friend opened up the door and said, "Hey, Kelly, how are you?" She said, "Great." As we always do, right? That's a question that we abuse constantly. How you doing? Great.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we did it at the beginning of this podcast, right? How you doing? Great. Right. All right, great. And we move on. Do I really care about how you're doing, Kurt?
I mean, I would like to think so.
Well, yeah, I do. But right then at that moment, that really wasn't a question that either of us were really willing to dive in and explore.
Yeah.
Right. Because we were going to move on. And it's kind of how we greet each other. And there's really nothing wrong with that. But again, at the same time, we abuse that. So when my wife answered, "I'm doing great," she looked at my wife and said, "Kelly, how are you?" And my wife broke down. And I mean, it was all of a sudden she was asking the exact same words, but then this time she meant it. This time it was, "No, really, how are you?" And it allowed my wife time to open up and to explain, "This is really hard. This is what's going on." And we can do the same thing as we, as leaders, as we counsel with people. A lot of that can happen by asking the right questions when we counsel, when we lead meetings out, really diving in. How many times have we heard, "So, Kurt, how was the activity? How was the young men's activity this week?" "Oh, it was great. Good." Yeah. And we move on. When actually it wasn't that great, but we don't know what else to say, maybe.
Yeah. My mind just went to the question here a lot where, obviously in the come follow me age here, we want people to bring part of their personal study to the classroom. So you may start a class and saying, "All right, how was your come follow me reading this week?" Or, what was your favorite, any highlights you want to share, right? And you sort of throw it out there and see if anybody bites, and it's like, okay, moving on. Let's move on to my lesson plan now. But but to maybe just sit with them like, no, like, what caught you off guard? Like, or what when you were driving around listening to that, that scripture or whatever, like, was there anything that gave you pause, right? And even asking the same question in different ways, you're massaging it into the room, right? And then suddenly people are actually, now that you put it that way, I thought of something,
Yeah.
So,
and I've done that where I've had the content in a class, but I come in and I start asking questions like that, and the content is gone because we are talking about what they learned, and they share it, and they bring out the stuff that I was going to teach anyways. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right. It comes out anyways, but it comes from them. And when it comes from them, it becomes so much more powerful.
Yeah, it's powerful. Awesome, Kevin. This has been great and really helpful. I think a lot of teachers, I think, will benefit from these. Just being more aware, right? Just that self awareness of the questions we ask. Like you said, it can be sort of this passive thought of, well, yeah, I'm going to ask questions. I don't know what I'm going to ask. I'll figure that out when I get there. But to really give space to process the questions you will ask, I think it'll lead to a higher learning experience. So that's awesome. Um, if people want to know more about your podcast, where would you send them, or where can they find it?
At teachingrestored.com, that has, and then on Facebook and YouTube and
Sure.
Instagram and all that good stuff,
Nice. And you have a co-host, Julie, who I've met
Julie.
does a phenomenal job as well. So
She's incredible.
yeah,
We have
lots of
so much fun
perspectives.
doing this.
That's cool. Awesome. Well, definitely people should check it out, and we'll link to it and make sure people know exactly where to go. Kevin, the last question I have for you, as you know, as you reflect on your time as a leader, whether it's in the bishopric, elders quorum presidency, or being a teacher, how has being a leader helped you become a better follower of Jesus Christ?
As I think on the times when I've been able to lead, it always comes back to me down to, I wonder how much I led compared to how much they led me. And it becomes a one-on-one experience for me. When I get to work with someone one-on-one, it's so very different than all the administrative stuff that we have to do. And it's sad that we have to do the administrative stuff so much, but at the same time, when we get to dive in and do that one-on-one ministering with people, I somewhat feel like I am coming to closer to Christ because of that, because I'm also in a way, hopefully helping that person, and at the same time, helping myself come into Christ. So for me, it's a one-on-one, and I'm still trying to get better at that. There is so much more that I need to do to be better at kind of a one-on-one mentality, and diving in and forgetting the administrative and focusing on the ministering piece. But really, it's the one-on-one for me, the experiences that I look back and I remember the most.